So this working group 2.4, the ecosystem. Ava and I have looked at different things. There are some things I've done on my end, just so you're aware of. I did submit proposals to both Google, AWS, Microsoft, and NVIDIA for support for our programs. So I
Okay.
will let you know if that comes through. Um, and Ava's been doing testing of our chatbot. We're hoping to convert some of those test users um, into people who want to become advisors like Glenda and Betsy. And then we'll reach out to PFAC for additional people. So we have a document called an allyship program for how we're going to onboard, and Ava's going to send that next week to Betsy and Glenda, and it's a way of how we're going to support additional onboarding of people and um, for that. So those things are things that Ava and I are working on. The one thing I thought maybe you could help us, we had talked about with Glemser, uh, seeing if they could, through pro bono, convert some of the labels, the Fire label version 3 or 4, the
Okay.
current. I was wondering if you could maybe take the lead on that and email them. I had an email a year ago with this guy, Jamie, but you may have better contacts. I think you had mentioned your company had engaged with Glemser on some things, right?
Yeah. Definitely can check up with them again. I actually got to follow up with them on some other things, so I think that makes sense to me.
Okay, so why don't you do that? Um, I'm going to ask Ava to reach out to Beverly to see if Ava and I can attend the next International Patient Summary. I think she attends those meetings or knows the community, um, and to see who it is. The Europeans always tell me they're all excited about International Patient Summary, and then I say, well, how have you used it in your projects, right? And
Yeah.
they never come up with any examples of how they've used it. So I mean, in principle, I like the idea of the International Patient Summary. It's an incomplete model, um, but I want to sort of bring that to a conclusion. Either we find the right people in HL7 to collaborate with, or they're not interested in evolving it in the directions that we need. But I'll ask Ava to connect with Beverly on that. And then another thing we've talked with Pfizer is with having Clear AI. And they had some training material that they were going to make public domain. So I'll ask Ava to reach out to Natalie Baum at Pfizer. And I think she took over that portfolio when Anne Louise left. Um, So I think that's uh, and actually I think this one is the same one as the one at the top. So we probably don't need both. This is a duplicate entry. Um, and then from our conference, we had somebody from Oxford uh, Pharmaceuticals come. So I will renew discussions with them to see. J&J is a member, hasn't been showing up lately, so I will reach out to them to see if I can get them engaged. They've also gone through some reorgs. Um, the they were involved with Gravitate Health in Europe, but that's winding down. That's a consortium in the EU. That's finishing up in spring. Um, and it doesn't look like they have follow-up funding. Um, they have some chatbots, but the chatbots aren't better than ours. And the evaluations that they've done so far, haven't been particularly, um, you know, revealing of any new material. So I think, it's been a great, they've done a lot of work to advance EPIs in Europe. Um, but the applications themselves are not that terribly advanced, especially when it comes to sort of like personalization and empathy. I don't think anyone's working on empathy. Um, so, some nice user interfaces, some good EPI labels, European labels, um, but there's nothing in their AI part that's any different than what you find anywhere else. So um, I'll follow up with. There's a meeting at Gravitate. There's two more meetings. One in um, December. They also have a hackathon. So we're going to look at what European labels they have and try to use those for our next testing. So maybe I'll add Gravitate there. Uh, and
Okay.
and then Bayer is part of Gravitate in Europe. I will see if they want to join us, Bayer USA. Um, there's one more company that should add here, Excellion, and they are the division of AstraZeneca, um, and they're here in Boston. They've expressed an interest in joining DCI now, so I'll follow up with all of those people and give an update at the next meeting. And yeah, if you could close the loop on Glimpser and ask them if they can give a demo of their tool, convert a handful of um, the labels to Fire version 3 and 7. My thought is for the next version of the chatbot is using the SPL one until we have reliable Fire labels.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I've been pretty outspoken about that part of it, where I
Yeah,
would love to strive for fire and better structuring and all the stuff that Craig's working on and support that. But I think we need to start with the available machine
yeah,
readable technology. So if we wanted to work with XML or even JSON in SPL format, I think that makes the most sense.
yeah,
Um, from talking to Jamie in the past, I'm trying to recall the conversations. I think the challenge they have is Fire 3 and 4 don't exist out in the wild yet either. So I don't know if they have that built into their tool for free
yeah,
conversions. I
yeah.
can see
Even
which
if
ones they have, and that would be the limitation there, is like
yeah,
whatever Fire they can build is what they would build.
yeah. I think if they have if they can give us Fire 1 or version 2, just
Hmm.
just so that we can have something to test it.
Yep.
And in terms of a roadmap, right? Because I think if we can test it with theirs, um, and I think it would give them an opportunity, to sell more product if they could show value, right?
I
Uh,
agree.
and we're not really in a position to buy their technology, but we could be an advocate to sort of say, yeah, we could say it's a useful technology. We've tested it with our chatbot. It gave us better results. We'd have to do that test between feeding it SPL and then feeding it Fire, and finally see whether the Fire label brings value. And I'd like to think that's true, but I don't know.
Right. I mean, I think that's it. But I do think, that's regardless of the outcome, that's still valuable. That's a valuable thing to put information out there on, right? Like, do the additional structures of Fire actually lead to better results over the already structured SPL?
Okay, sounds good. So does this sound good to you? Is there other things you think we should be doing here in terms of growing the ecosystem? Got quite a few things here, but is there anything missing you think that we've talked about?
I'm thinking here. The what Adam Blumenthal, right from the most recent
Yeah.
conference. I think we might want to explore a little bit about the research he's doing,
Okay.
because it sounds like he's got an IRB study on how to use his chatbot going on up in Canada right now, and what the impacts of that are. I love, like, you see it. It's really hard not to love what he's built, and how it's probably far more advanced than anyone else, what anyone else is doing out there, because it was able to recognize conversational speech patterns and then elicit empathy from the conversational speech patterns. So that's a big one, in my mind, right? Yuri is like, he's using vocals to help with empathy, which means he's got to have some experience with empathy and things like that. I don't know
Yeah.
how much is proprietary to what he's doing, but I'm wondering how much he'd be willing to share or partner with us in some of what we're doing, because I don't think there's a huge overlap either, because we're talking about putting like a pocket notebook in people's hands for the most part, that eventually we'll be able to chat with people, where he's focusing purely on that empathy chat dynamic, like verbal chat dynamic, avatar chat dynamic. So maybe there's a way where we can enhance each other's work.
Yeah, so I'll invite him to present. I prodded him on that at the conference, but I said, how do you go about deciding how to do the empathy or how to do the personalization, right? Um, and he didn't really say.
Yeah,
Said it. I know it's a voice-based thing, but like, do they detect word length, semantics, tone of voice, and how do you validate that? I think this is the problem with AI and private sector products, that they're black boxes and you don't know how they were built. And I get it that they want to protect their intellectual property, but at the same time, it's really hard to sort of, evaluate something and know, you know, was it the LLM that out of the box already had that empathy training, or did you do something to an existing LLM to train it? So what I did this week, is I used AI to generate content to train our LLM on empathy and health literacy. And it generated examples of how to do literacy responses at different levels of literacy, and it came up with examples of different ways of providing empathy. And my thought is feeding all that content to the LLM as training material, and then running our next version um, with this, and comparing it, like running it with that training material and without it, and comparing the answers to see if that training material actually helped. And part of that training material looks for certain styles of words, word length, types of words, and it tries to map it to different styles. So it's kind of like using AI to generate better AI. We'll see. We'll see if that works. So we'll run a test. So Catherine is looking at how to take that training content that I generated this week and
hmm
create a second version of the chatbot, so we can do that A/B comparison and see if that works. But it took me like an hour to generate that content, and it generated like more than 100 pages of examples of different styles of empathy. And um, so, I don't know if the LLMs are so advanced now that a lot of that maybe it doesn't even need that training content. Maybe a lot of these have absorbed so much content that they have that, but we'll see. That's sort of the idea of reaching out to Clear AI to see if that public content that they were saying that they were going to make publicly available, those guidelines, we could feed that into it as well and see if it makes a difference or not. I I would think so, but I think we need to do the test, and then once we figure that out, my goal is to then publish that as a public resource, right, for other people to use. We'll get a publication, we'll say, here it is, but here's the appendix, and make it an open source thing, because it's, there's no real intellectual property that you can monetize, because this is moving so fast that in 2 weeks or 6 months, right, the AI systems, you know, may have that already built into their knowledge base. So my goal is just to advance the field, as quickly and as transparently as possible.
Well, that makes sense. And that's the challenge I think we have to understand too, like with Adam, and when we have folks like him willing to work with us, is like what can they share? What are they willing to share? I do recall, some of the questions at the conference, and I think we just didn't have enough time to really get into it with him either, because I think he was the responses were more focused, I think, on just it knows, right, based on what on the conversation. And I think we're trying to understand, right, is it exactly what you said, is it the shortness of the words, like how is it doing speech pattern recognition in order to derive somebody's maybe going through there? Is it using any visual cues because it's got an avatar? Does it potentially have a camera on, or is it purely just the speech intonations? How is it intaking the verbal cues, right? Is it even like how does it know that it's hearing what the person said accurately and things like that? There's a lot of different elements to what he's built and what he shared. Um, but knowing that some of this stuff is studied and it's going to be put out there, he might not be able to share all that framework. Minimally, we can monitor some of that studies or talk about how the
Yeah.
studies are being structured to do that testing. And I think that's something he has to publicly put out there anyway, so that we could get out of him, I think, pretty easily.
Yeah.
And I just, like I said, I don't think there's a huge overlap in some of what he's doing. I think what he's doing could be a tie into what we're doing, because I think if we wanted to build something that's more palliative in nature, I think that's what Adams built. But
Yeah.
we're talking about somebody that's more of like a health system navigator or health information navigator, right? And he's really working on something that's more about that type of like you have a really severe diagnosis. Here's somebody who can answer questions for you thing. So, and it's going to try to answer it empathetically. But
So there's one more thing, Ava. We were gonna see if we can get that palliative care training contents from Dana Farber. You could follow up with that. Okay. I'm gonna have to head out because I've got to drive over to my appointment. Valdeci, how are you?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
Good. Hey, listen, we just reviewed the uh, different tasks to sort of grow our network here. I put the link in the chat for everyone that has all the tracking. If you click on the link and you can't view it, email your Gmail account to Ava and she'll add it, and then you'll be able to view this. This is the project tracker. This has all the working groups so that you can all see where we are.
Thank you.
Okay.
And apologies for being late. I'm
No
having
problem.
internet issues today.
Yeah, no problem. And apologies, I have to go to a medical appointment. So I'm gonna have to run off, but in any case, are there any other things, Ava, David, you wanna?
I think that is all. I don't think we have anything else.
yeah, I think that's okay for today.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, have a great weekend and we'll follow up on all these leads, and the next meeting we can pick this up. All right. Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
Have a great
Take care,
weekend.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you. Bye.
you. Bye-bye.